Well, I never raced. In the early years, I didn't have a chance to ride my bike. But as I had more employees, I started riding bikes. But then Ron and the girls got involved in racing, so you take it from there.
Yeah, for me, when you bought the bike shop, and I got my first at Nishiki International, and getting out there at age 13 and riding, there was so much freedom. It's just all of a sudden I could go to Golden and up Lookout Mountain, and eventually one time I went over Squaw Pass, and I went down to Idaho Springs and went up to Berthoud Pass, and
and in those days people didn't. I remember you telling me that you discovered this little area which was farther south, and it was called Roxborough.
Oh, right.
And you described it looked like red rocks, and who lets their 13-year-old roam like that now?
Yeah, nowadays, yeah. And I remember one time, we took a trip to Yellowstone, and I decided to go for a bike ride. Well, my 1 hour bike ride turned into 5 hours, and Mom called the police, and I remember a police officer pulled me over and said, "Hey, are you Ron Kiefel?" I'm like, "Yeah, why?" "Your mom's looking for you." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm in big trouble."
I don't even remember that.
Oh yeah, I just that route of exploration and seeing what's around the next corner, that's where I got into bike racing. The mechanic Bob Jungi took me in for my first bike race at the Denver Tech Center.
And it was just being platted.
Yeah.
They had poured the roads, but there were no buildings.
Yeah, and it was an open field, and I crashed 300 meters before the finish line and tore up my whole Cool Gear uniform,
Exactly.
And I love bike racing, but I just crashed, and I came home and Mom was like, "Oh, well, you got to quit racing. Just go to school, get your education."
Yeah.
But
you listened.
Well. Yeah, I listened well. I went on and made the junior world team in '78, and then the Olympic team in '84, and raced 7 Tour de Frances. But those early years, really, that sense of getting out there and working hard, and I love competition. I love being in the race and seeing how far I could push myself, and that's what racing in Europe was a really big deal. And there were guys that I thought were better than I was, but when we went to Europe to race, like myself and Davis and Andy Hampston, we always managed to make it to the finish. You suffered, you've just focused on getting to the finish, and we get to the finish and it's like, oh, where's everybody else? Well, they would quit. So the guys that persevered were successful, and we kept bringing those people on, and that's how we built a very successful 7-Eleven cycling.
So when did your girls came into racing?
Well, I remember we'd be standing around, and Yvonne Van Gent, who's still around today, she would look at us girls and she'd say, "Why aren't you racing?" It's like, well, there's no women. There were women racing, and there were good women racing, but there weren't many junior women. So it's like, well, come on out. So I remember we both showed up for the junior, the state road championship.
I am a state road champion.
You are a state road champion.
I was the only one in my age group, but I won.
And I did the time trial. I still have my time trial jersey too.
Do you?
Yeah. But the same thing, I remember there was that freedom. And I know when I got in college, I was doing some road racing. But once I found mountain bike racing, then that was really an adventure.
That's right.
Because we would start somewhere, and they would send us off out into the woods or over a mountain or something. And some races I would not see another person for 2.5 or 3 hours. And you'd get to the finish, and you'd think that everybody else was still ahead of you or behind you or something. Anyway, it was a big adventure.
Yeah.
And
so when did you go to Italy for the
I went to I was on the national team in 91 and went to Italy.
It wasn't 91, is that right?
91. Was that a little while ago?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember one time, Linda, I had just, I was racing, I came back in the fall, and Linda said, "Hey, let's go mountain biking." And I go, "Oh, sure." And so we go up to the Colorado Trail, and we get to this little twisty downhill part, and I'm thinking, "Oh, I'm pretty good," and all of a sudden Linda just goes, she's gone. I'm like, what just happened? I'm the big road guy, and I got dropped by my sister.
I'm the famous bike rider.
I'm like, I think I'm humbled now.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I think is so important is it's easier for me to say that cycling has always been a part of my life since you bought the shop. We've done, Gil and I, my boyfriend, now husband, We did a 2-month bicycle tour through the Canadian Rockies. We did a bicycle tour on our honeymoon, which is not recommended. Take your fiance, your new bride, to the beach. So we had a tornado take out our honeymoon suite. We have cycled throughout, or Linda and I have cycled in Europe a couple times, and Gil and I have.
Yes.
And we have done family bicycle tours. We rode down the Oregon coast with our family, and we did that trip to Glenwood Springs.
Right.
And now my boys are bike racing, and it's easy to say, I don't think there's been a month in my life when I haven't been on a bike, either
Right.
mountain or road,
Right.
since we bought the shop.
I remember my favorite thing was when Dad came over to watch me race at the Tour de France, and I heard from the tour director, Greg Hogan at the time. He said, "Oh, your dad, his bike is so heavy. His bike they always try to lift it on top of the van." And he said he would have enough tools in there to overhaul his whole bicycle at any point in the ride, you know.
And you always carried those
Everybody else knows that the van is following.
Yeah, the van is following, yet he can overhaul every bike with all the tools. And you hoss that bike up the West, you know.
So that's the story of the Kiefel
Well, and I remember.
clan, huh?
Do you remember when I came over to the Tour de France the first time?
Yep, I remember that.
And I was, I got to go to Alpe d'Huez, and I was, maybe halfway up the climb. I was right by the church. I'd ridden up there, and I was with Breaking Away Tours, and I was so excited. I got to see Ron in the Tour de France. So the front leaders come past, and then here comes Ron riding with the group, and we were cheering and yelling, "Go, Ron!" And Ron pulls over, and I'm like, "This is a race. You can't stop." He said, "I just have to make it in the time limit, and I'm okay." So he chatted for a few minutes, and then he said, "Well, I better get going." I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, why don't you run next to me and we'll talk for a few minutes?" Because I think we were meeting the next day because it was your day off,
right.
and we were going to figure out where we could meet up and ride.
During the race, yeah.
So I'm trotting up the road next to Ron, and all of a sudden, there's gendarmes every distance up the climb, and a gendarme steps out as if to make me stop running
Right.
next to this poor, hapless bike racer. And Ron just lifts his hand up. He's like, "No, we're fine." The gendarme steps back, and I keep running. you got to, it's like, yes, look at me.
Oh,
I
that's
mean, it was
fun.
just so fun.
Made a fun
It was a
memory for
vivid
her. Yeah.
memory that I had. But do you remember how Mom loved to ride her bike, but she didn't like to ride up the hill.
Right.
So if we were driving, we have a family condo in Dillon. If we were driving back from Dillon, she would have you drive up to the top of Lookout Mountain, unload her.
Loveland
I'm sorry,
Pass, yeah.
Loveland Pass. Pull out, get her out. She'd put on her jacket and her helmet, and she just grin, smile all
As soon
the
as
way.
downhill was done. Yeah.
Just having a great time, and then all the way down until it was
Uphill.
time for a climb, and then she'd pull over and you'd pull over.
Yeah,
and
she loved
pull her
that.
back up.
We call it downhill mama.
Yeah.
Yeah, so cycling is an intrinsic part of our lives, isn't it?